Hi, I'm Joe Scotchaferro, and this is On Location. All right, I know I bring you unique people in our industry, and I know every time I say, oh, well, this is a unique person, but this one's got some twists and turns that we have not had before. So, starts out as punk rocker, heavy metal, finds his way to theology and the seminary, still doing music, goes from Princeton to New York to Princeton, doing music, but also teaching theology and getting involved as a pastor. I can't even do this justice, this introduction. And that's not the end of the story. That's the beginning of the story. So welcome, Billy Webster, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing great, Joe. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
No problem. And I love your set. I mean, as production people, I have to take note of that. It is gorgeous. Uh,
Well,
I,
yeah.
I'm sure you went out and hired a whole crew. There's a team of people right there in your area, your lighting directors, your audio guys,
Oh, yeah,
superstars,
yeah.
superstars like yourself. That's how you roll.
I just get my kids to do it.
So I have to also, in all transparency, Billy and I have only known each other 6 months, maybe a year. But I would say our first meeting, it was like finding a lost brother. We just clicked like that. Everything, every part of our body, spirit, mind, and creativity just all lined up. So that's rare, but I'm very, very happy that happened. Let's get into
Yeah.
you, brother. Let's get into you. I'm not going to let you talk yet. Let's.
All right.
So, give me the beginning, because everybody in the creative world has a beginning that usually isn't the end. So let's talk about how you got into punk.
Well, I was fortunate to grow up in a tri-state area, Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey, right where they come together. And I was on the Pennsylvania side, and we were the metal kids. So, growing up and getting into bands, this was in the late '80s, early '90s. So the heyday of hair metal and Guns N' Roses and all of that. And that was really the genre that I was interested in, and that's the kinds of songs I was trying to write with my buddies. But just across the river in Port Jervis, New York, it was a completely different music scene. These were all skateboarding punk kids. And somehow we got thrown together. I think it was through the drama club because a lot of us were into acting and doing school musicals, and our schools did a co-production of West Side Story, which is pretty symbolic. You've got these rival towns on either side of the river, and they pull from the two high schools to do West Side Story. But they integrated the schools so that it wasn't like one of us were the Jets and one were the Sharks. We were integrated. And I started meeting all these kids who were really into punk music, and I had heard of the Ramones, I'd heard of the Sex Pistols, but I hadn't heard of like a lot of this sort of deeper cut punk music. And it was really through my friendship with them that I started to get into that side of things and started to try to kind of integrate that into the music that I was writing, sort of get away from the sort of like strip club party songs that you find in a lot of the metal stuff and get a little bit more sort of socially aware and talking about, how I'm actually feeling rather than, trying to get out there and be like the baddest guy on stage. And so that was really my intro to that. And from that point on, I've always been sort of a musical sponge. So I'm coming up through my parents' music, record collection, and that's all 60s and 50s stuff. So that's already operating in the background. when I get into high school, I start to get into metal and hard rock, and I kind of add that. Then this punk thing comes along. I'm like, okay, that's going to be part of it too. But what ended up happening to a lot of people who have various influences, it becomes this thing unto itself where you could sort of point to it and say, I hear traces of punk, but I also hear Beatles harmonies, but I also hear heavy guitar riffs that obviously come from Zeppelin. And, so that was really sort of where that happened, was being in that town that I was in that was close to a lot of other towns and a lot of other scenes.
Everything you just said, I'm sitting here smirking because, of course, yes, that's how it works, and that's if you stay the course, that's where you go. Let me just transition you off to the side for a minute on the practical side. So all of us who started out wanting to be musicians and being in bands, there was also this other side that we weren't aware of, is that we had to learn tech, we had to learn amplifiers, we had to learn how this plugs into that. And when we play out, we have to have that. And so how did that come of age in your world?
Well, I'm just old enough that my first experience in a recording studio was that experience of saving a bunch of money and then going to your local studio where there's a guy who has some track record in the music industry. Our guy was a guy named Carl Pagliarulo, and he had a studio behind his restaurant in Milford, Pennsylvania, and he had gold records on his wall like the Bee Gees. I assumed that he worked on those albums, but who knows? But you go in there with your $500 or your $1,000 or whatever you're able to scrape together and say, could we please be here for 3 hours and just do the best we can? And it's complete, everything is out of your control and you're completely beholden to the powers that be. And that was really the era of industry gatekeeping, where make a demo, try to get a deal, all that. The idea of recording at home was completely alien. So it was really just observing the professionals around us as we slowly made progress, slowly got gigs, met sound people, met sound engineers, and started paying attention to, okay, where does this go? And what is this? We could barely tune our guitars the first time we recorded anything. And so, I'm doing that. But as I moved to New York and I'm getting involved in the scene there, then all of a sudden I start hearing about, there's these digital Tascam players that you can have at home. And, and so got one of those and tried to start figuring out. My ex-brother-in-law was a sound engineer, and I would ask him a million questions. What does this button do? And he would just say, and I still think about this to this day, just turn all the buttons, press every button, turn every knob, and just... He's like, you'll know what sounds good. You might not know why it sounds good.
Exactly.
But you'll know. And so, so I went from going into a studio, big reel-to-reel machines, to now doing most of my recording, like many people, on the computer that I'm talking to you through.
So,
go ahead. I was going to say, the other thing is that up until about 10 years into my musical career, I was the lead singer. And so I didn't know much of anything. I was willfully ignorant. The lead singer syndrome of you offer to help the equipment after everything's already been moved, and so I really was kind of, for the context I was in, I was pretty late to the game in terms of getting to understand how the equipment even worked. Because I was just like, all I need is a microphone and tight pants.
That's I'm laughing because it's just such a lead singer thing. I mean, 90% of the time you pull up in your van and you're loading gear into the place, and you look around and you're like, where is he, or where is she? And and it just was that. It was just, and it's every band I've ever played in, every band I've ever toured with. It's all the same thing. I can't believe you just said that. That's great. So let's take your journey a little further. So you're playing in the city now. You're fronting a band, as we just learned. And how are you booking gigs? How is that whole unfolding? Because I know the New York scene isn't just that easy.
Yeah, and I don't know so much about how it is now, but I can say that this was in the early 90s. And so, a very different era, where you really just walk around to clubs. When we first got to New York, we were living a block and a half from CBGB, and we just literally walked in there with our tape and a picture of us and said, "Can we play here?" And and the guy sort of laughed at us, but then, he took the tape and called us back a couple days later and said, "I'll start you on a Sunday afternoon," which I think is how a lot of people start at
Yeah, yeah,
CBGB.
yeah, yeah.
And so, I mean, we really started just like a lot of kids who moved to New York from Pennsylvania, from rural Pennsylvania, just sort of doing it ourselves. Fortunately, pretty early on, we were renting a rehearsal space on Bleecker Street, and the guys who owned the rehearsal space were also into management. And they would listen to us practice. And I remember they came and they said, "You guys sound like Squeeze." And we were like, "Who's Squeeze?" We didn't even know who Squeeze was. I subsequently went out and bought a Squeeze CD. I'm like, "These guys are amazing. We don't sound this good." But anyway, he's like, "You remind us of Squeeze." And so we'd like to, talk about managing you. And we ended up signing a management deal with them. And then from that point on, it definitely got a lot easier because we didn't have to do any of that legwork. Um, but that was me when we first got there. It was just the whole like walk into a club and hope for the best. Hope you're charming enough,
Yeah.
just to get somebody to not kick you out immediately. Fortunately, we were young and kind of cute, and so I think it got us in the door. These 18-year-old kids.
I got to tell you, I know a lot of club owners. I don't know if cute matters.
Maybe not. Maybe that, and we might not have been that cute. That might be a fabricated memory.
But you know what? It's so interesting to hear stories because you keep saying something without saying it. We just did it. We just
Hmm.
went. We didn't think about it. We didn't have all this heavy strategy. We didn't turn the knobs, see what happens. Walk into a club, see what happens.
Yeah.
Walk onto a film set, see what happens. That is kind of the major path to success in the creative world is go do it.
Yeah, I agree, and this is something I would have never have been able to articulate 30 years ago. But that sort of that line between I'm going to use a little bit of woo-woo language here, but of manifesting your dreams, manifesting your goals, like having some idea of who you are and what talents you possess and where you see those potentially taking you, but then not being so rigid about what that's going to look like that you close yourself off from opportunities that may seem like they're from left field, but they're actually really aligned with where you're going. You just don't know that that's where you're going yet. And so I'm always like, you do have to have some kind of plan. You have to know who you are. You have to know what you're good at. You have to, or what you want to be good at, because that's a part of it too.
Yeah.
Um, I've gotten good at things that I was not good at 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And you have to know enough about who you are and where you see yourself going to not just be sort of floating in the wind, but you also really have to stay open and be sort of naive enough to just, like you said, just try things, push the button, turn the knob, whether that's literally on a control board or whether that's a metaphor for being out in a club. And yeah, absolutely.
Well, you just set up a perfect segue. Thank you very much. So when you dabbled into and gave us a really good understanding of the inner you and how that has to work so talk to me how you made another turn here and started pursuing your theological, your spiritual, that's another explanation of just do it. Let me try it. See what happens.
Yeah, and it definitely was not a plan. It was that was a very organic unfolding, and I think I don't, not to get too granular about it, but I grew up in the church. I felt really connected to the idea of there being something more to life than what we see with our eyes and what we hear with our ears. That there are intangible qualities to life that connect us, sustain us, that we spring from, that we return to. these elemental spirits and realities. And so I felt really connected to that, but I didn't necessarily feel that the church experience that I had was articulating those feelings accurately. So I kind of carried around a bit of tension about I'm feeling a pull to this, but I don't have the language for it. I don't have the lens to see through to kind of get to where I'm trying to get with it. So it just sort of became a background hum until I'm in New York and I'm writing these songs, and then all of a sudden, I'm noticing lyrically. Well, I don't even, actually. I read a review of one of our first record that we did, and it said Webster's lyrics weave many spiritual themes throughout them. And I thought to myself, I do? Like I don't know that I realized that I was even doing that. So I kind of sort of went back and looked at the lyrics and took a look at what I was writing in the present moment. And I was like, yeah, that reviewer is right. I do that. And I also noticed that my hard rock friends, my punk friends, my New York tons of piercings and tattoo friends, they would really respond to the songs that had those lyrics, because I wasn't proselytizing. I wasn't saying, I believe this, so you have to believe this, or else you're screwed. I have all the answers. It was more about, I have all the questions. I don't have any of the answers, but here's what I'm feeling when I ask the questions. And sometimes the question is the answer. And in fact, we had a song called Questions and Answers, and that was what the whole song was about. I didn't realize that's what it was about until months later. And so that just kept deepening. But what I was finding is that I didn't have the vocabulary to say what I was trying to say. I didn't have the language. I didn't have the expertise. I didn't have I hate to use this word, but I didn't have the authority, to sort of.
I get it.
And so I thought, if I'm going to do this and I'm going to try to bridge this world between my own spiritual seeking and the world of the music that I'm coming out of, I'm going to need to go somewhere and spend some time studying this. So I applied to 3 seminaries, and most people go to seminary to be either a priest or a pastor, or a religion professor or educator of some kind, or maybe they see a future for themselves in the institutional church. And then you have a sort of smaller fraction of people like myself who sort of are defined as spiritual seekers. And I definitely had some professors who were like, you shouldn't be here for spiritual seeking. That's not what this place is for. But I didn't leave. I stayed anyway. And so that 3-year experience of being in seminary and studying theology every day and going to chapel and learning to preach and studying the Bible and studying, I also studied world religions, so getting into Eastern religion and philosophy. That was a sort of monastic experience of just, I did continue to write songs and I did continue to play music, but on a much smaller scale. It was really about just building up the information that I could then kind of dump into these songs and see where that took me when I graduated. And all my friends from seminary became Reverend so-and-so and Professor so-and-so. And, I didn't become those things. I just continued the troubadour wandering minstrel journey. Just, I had a Master of Divinity degree.
That's a big marquee sign though. I was trying to figure out how you put that all on the front. Or even so walk into a club now and go, okay, this is who I am.
I am a Master of Divinity. It says it right here in Latin. You have to believe me because it's in Latin. Well, it's funny because my wife has a PhD, and my kids always say, Mom is much more educated than you are, but your degree sounds much cooler than hers.
I will not touch that subject. I'm not going near it. But so, I find this so fascinating, and I have from the minute I met you, is because your path is not anybody else's. I know literally thousands and thousands of people that I've met over the years in the creative world, and people at this level and at this level, but nobody has your path. I have one friend that was a phenomenal, phenomenal guitar player, rock guitar player, when we grew up together in the same town, who went off and became a Catholic priest. And but he still went out and gigged until the church said, "You okay? Pick one. You can't
Oh
do
wow.
both."
Well, I get that though. That's one of the reasons that I never got involved in the institutional church as a full priest in charge, because I knew that there would be bishops that I would be beholden to who would have, direct authority over what I could and couldn't say. And I often thought as a songwriter, you know, if I get put in a position where I have to defend the institution or defend what I think of as the truth, the powers that be are going to always want me to defend the institution first
Mm.
and the truth second. And now sometimes those things are aligned. I'm not like anti-church, and I'm not saying there is no truth in the church, but I'm saying when you are that enmeshed in an institution and you're working in a creative field, you can really bump up against people who don't appreciate sort of thinking outside of the box or questioning the inside of the box. You see, so that was always why I did work in the church and I worked for the church, but I was never a priest fully installed because I just wouldn't have had the freedom to write what was in my heart and feel there were no potential repercussions.
Let's talk about that part for a second, because when you get to the chronological point in your life, where all creatives, no matter what field, you get to a point where you're in a crossroads. Can I make a living doing this, which is what I've been gifted to do, and I have to write, and can I do that? But then it becomes, who's the market? And I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
turn this into a real nuts and bolts sort of conversation, but that's a reality. If you want to make a
Absolutely.
living, you have to have something the world wants to buy.
Mm-hmm.
Did that cross your mind when you were doing this, or did you stay the pure creative that was in your heart and soul, and I'm going to do this regardless?
Oh, I absolutely thought about how do I make a living. And when I was young, it was, how do I become a pop star? I mean, I never let go of writing the songs that came into my heart as I picked up my guitar, or sat behind the drums, or whatever it was. And I never really monitored or edited, but I had enough material that you would consider purely secular, that I would shop that stuff and I would see where I could get that on the radio. And it's funny because it would often be the case that I would sort of get the attention of Christian rock stations or Christian rock labels, and but then they would sort of see that I had all this other stuff and they'd be like, "Oh, I don't know about all that." And then I would often have the case of bringing like my more secular, like songs about my wife or songs about, something that isn't specifically or explicitly spiritual. And, people would sort of get into that, but then they say, "Oh, wait, but you got all this like God stuff." And I don't know if and so it really became a question of, do I try to go one way or the other, or do I sort of say, do I admit that there's going to be some collateral damage in terms of opportunities, but believe that ultimately the blending of these things is where this is supposed to go, and trust in that. And that may be 20 years from now. That may be a few thousand people instead of a few million people. That may be playing for hundreds of people instead of thousands of people. And that's going to be okay, because if you don't dilute the work you're doing, keep it what it is and what it's trying to be, then the people who it does impact and connect with, that's going to be a very pure experience for them. And it's not going to be compromising. Now, I'm not saying that, for some people, saying I'm going to be a pop star and I'm going to do this, and this to become a pop star, that might be your journey.
Right.
If you're Madonna or if you're who, like that might be the journey. And I love a lot of those artists. I had to make a decision about whether I was going to try to go one way or the other, because when I was in seminary, I can tell you, I had so many people saying, "Oh, this Christian rock station's going to love this." And I did get involved in some of that, but it was never. And you had said a couple minutes ago that there aren't a lot of people who sort of have this particular journey that I have. But I will say that in the secular rock world, there were people I could look at and say they could have had a journey like mine. They just got to a similar place in a different way. And I'm not comparing talent or success here, but I'm saying someone like George Harrison or a group like U2, where they have really integrated their pop sensibility and their rock star aspirations with their spiritual journey and with their questions and spiritual longings in a way that's, I think, very authentic. And so, did they go to seminary? No. Have I been as successful as them? Obviously not. But I have had people that I could look at and say, oh, they're doing something similar. They got to it a different way.
Man, that's cool. Yeah. When you explained it that way, then I get it. Because when you first said, then I wanted to learn more. I wanted to get answers. I wanted, you were seeking at that time. And I said,
Hmm.
that's a research project. I mean, to make this very, just bring it to a very secular world, that's a research project. I want to go study this field and learn this so that I can come back and do this. Uh,
Yes.
that's cool as shit.
Well, and it's funny because I remember getting interviewed because every school interviews potential students, and I remember in my interview saying, I'm going to have a church, but in my church, the music is going to be the worship, and people are going to come to the bar for communion, which is obviously like for some people a very blasphemous idea, but it was symbolic of what I was trying to articulate in terms of bringing disparate groups of people. I mean, because like, listen, how many of us have had what we would describe as a religious experience at a rock concert or any kind of concert, a symphony or a play, where you are transported out of yourself and
Yeah.
you are no longer kind of in the body that you're in, but you're connected to the spirit of what is happening in that room. I saw Radiohead at CBGB in 1993. There were about 100 people there. This was when their first album had just come out. And I didn't know who they were. This was total luck that we ended up at this show. And that was a religious, the energy and the power and the beauty that was coming off of that stage in that little room. I can still feel it to this day. Was Tom York singing about specifically religious things? No, but it was a religious experience because it was transcendent. And so I just feel like those things can happen anywhere under any circumstances. And I'm just trying to coalesce those things around the particular group of songs that I'm writing and presenting to the world.
Wow. Wow. That's so awesome. And let's talk about now. So that journey has evolved, has brought you to, and you did mention home studios, and you did mention that ability. So how did, and this is bringing it very practical, how did the technology, your access to technology, combined with your songwriting, combined with your journey, establish what you can do and what you've been doing in the last couple of years?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think one of the great things, and I know that some people have concerns about this, especially with AI now, is sort of everybody having unfettered access to any kind of technology. But I can say that for someone like me, it was so liberating to be able to just, you know, start to grab this piece of equipment, grab this piece of equipment, start figuring out how it kind of goes together. And like, you can do these things on any budget. I mean, that's one of the things I love about the current state of creating at home, which is, basically what I do here, is that, some of the recordings that I'm the most excited about and sound the best to me are ones that I did as demos in GarageBand on my laptop. And again, it's sort of like that piece of advice that I was given 30 some years ago. You know what sounds good.
Right.
And if you and so just I think having the persistence to sort of keep going, because it's so easy to stop. And I have so many friends who were great musicians who just don't do music anymore.
Yeah.
And they'll often say, "Well, how do you keep going?" I said, "Well, I just do." You know,
Yeah.
I love, and every time something, a new tool becomes accessible and available, I try it out. And if it's like Chat GPT, I get bored with it after a week. But if it's a new recording software that Apple just launched, that might be something I'd do 3 albums with.
Hmm.
And that learning curve of, you can go on YouTube and watch videos, or you can hire someone to teach you, or you can just try to figure it out yourself, or some combination of all of those things. Most of us in this business, we have friends who know how to do this stuff. I mean, people love to share their knowledge. Some people just love to hear themselves talk. I'm an example. I'm doing it right now. Um, you know, and so, and it's funny because I think the more, and this is sort of a larger lesson that I've learned, the more you open yourself up to the possibility of things happening in your life, just mentally, the more likely they're actually going to happen. I can still remember when we lived in a town that was flooded during Hurricane Irene in 2011. And most of the studio equipment I had in the house was destroyed in that flood.
Mm.
And I remember thinking, oh, it's going to take so much to build this back up. And I had, a friend who was like, I've got a bass lying around. Let me give you my bass. Another friend, I got a couple of guitar pedals. Let me give you those. And before I knew it, I had cobbled together from the generosity of friends of mine enough to sort of rebuild. And I think that was because I didn't let myself get too disillusioned by that experience, and thought like something is going to come out of this. And what's funny is that I had a laptop that was destroyed in that flood, and I had started writing this piece I've written called Bold Enough to Say, which you and I have talked about, which really is the piece that marries the worlds of rock and religion. And everything that was on that laptop got lost. And I had done all this work on it. And I started from scratch, and it was so much better. And if I hadn't lost that computer and had to start over from memory, you know,
Hmm. Hmm.
it would have been something totally different and totally inferior, and it would have been really easy to give up right there. But
Yeah.
I didn't.
That yeah. Well, again, we've talked about it. Your flood is when Feral Productions burned to the ground, and I
Yeah,
lost everything, and it was the same situation. What's really strange in that, or it's actually good, it's spiritually good, is my competitors, people we went after each other for generations, decades, competing, all said, "Hey, here's gear. You can use this. Here's cameras. Here's lights. I mean, it's production companies. There's a lot of equipment, and it was
yeah,
like, here, have this. If I need it, I'm going to pull it back. But while I'm not using it, keep it." That changed everything in my head. That
isn't it
changed.
amazing?
These people weren't my enemies anymore. These people, I didn't have, they weren't war dogs. There wasn't West Side Story. We didn't have it. That was a good callback, well, right? Uh,
You tied that up
and
nice.
I'm listening to that, and it is the same thing, and it keeps coming back. You keep hitting on the same point throughout your life journey. Is keep an open mind, keep moving, keep trying. Don't get frustrated when it doesn't turn out the way you expect it. Because if you keep moving, you will arrive. The only time you won't arrive is if you stop.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And it's so hard. I mean, I feel like I have to tell myself that lesson over and over again.
Yeah.
And and what's great with having, I have 2 sons, and what's great about having them, there's many things that are great, but they will always sort of like spit my advice back to me when I am in a bad place and I need to hear it, So if we're late for something and like I'm hitting all these yellow lights and I'm like, yeah, visibly getting frustrated, and being late is one of my buttons, and and my son said to me, he's like, for all you know, if you had made that last light, you would have been in an accident in the next intersection. So the fact that we hit that yellow, and that was something I had said to him, and, earlier, and so that's another thing I try to remember is exactly what you said, is that when things don't go the way you think they're supposed to go,
Yeah.
if you just take a breath and keep your cool, what you're probably going to find is that you're going to end up where you should have been all along. And that setback was a crucial part of that.
Yeah.
You mentioned the fire in your studio. Fires, in mythology, they either destroy or they purify. And I feel like it's
Wow.
up to us to decide which, when we have an event like that, is that here to destroy us, or is that here to purify us and give us the sort of clarity to continue?
Yeah. Well, that's what it ended up being for me. We're closing in on time here, but I do want to. So, tell me about. You also spent 7 years with Somerset Hills, and that's a whole other compliment journey that you put into your world. And again, that's almost where we crossed paths, but I didn't quite get to the gig. So
Yeah, yeah.
let's talk about that moment.
Absolutely, yeah. So I was just coming out of there was a 1 year period where I was working in a church as a pastoral associate. I was not the priest, but I assisted the priest, and I did a lot of preaching and all of the kind of priestly things. I enjoyed the experience. I'm really glad I did it. It didn't feel consistent with who I am and what my journey is. So I left that position. As I was leaving, I heard about this organization called Music in the Somerset Hills, and they needed someone to come in and do their administration. And I didn't know really what they were about. But it turns out Music in the Somerset Hills is a nonprofit music organization that presents mostly classical and choral music, a little bit of jazz and big band here and there, but mostly, Baroque and romantic pieces from hundreds of years ago, presented in very unique venues across the Somerset Hills, which is in northern New Jersey. And, so maybe Handel's Water Music performed where the orchestra is on a stage that's is in a lake. So you've got an orchestra basically floating out on the stage performing Handel's Water Music to 400 people who are sitting on the shore. And this was a very parallel experience to going to seminary, because I felt like I needed to understand running a music organization if I was going to keep moving my own thing forward. And I needed to understand other kinds of music and how do you present events that pose these big logistical challenges, and how do you budget for doing these kinds of events, and how do you execute contracts with the musicians that you might want to hire if you're going to do a show like Bold Enough to Say. And so I became the executive director of Music in the Somerset Hills. And for 7 years, while I wrote and performed my own music, I was also running this organization, basically figuring out how to make these amazing music events happen in untraditional venues, and handling the ticketing and the contract and all that stuff. And, it was a beautiful experience. And I still have a good relationship with that organization. But this year I realized, it's now time to take everything I learned in seminary and everything I learned with Music in the Somerset Hills and apply that all to Billy songs and the Jersey Dream, as I call this space, and start to find collaborators who I can work with and offer my abilities and share my gifts with them and find ways to connect and collaborate. And about a week after I made that decision, you and I were introduced. And I want to second what you said about feeling an immediate connection. This is an old friend from some other place, and now we're in this place. And what's been lovely is that I've had that experience with a couple other people right around the same time. It's sort of like made the decision to open myself up to this chapter, and I met you and a few other folks who know who they are, and it's unfolding. And I'm excited about how it's unfolding.
Yeah, that. I love that part of. I've learned to love that part of life. That's the part that scares most people, is the unknown.
Yeah.
To me, the unknown is only unknown to me. It's just I'm the only one who doesn't get it. It's there. It's coming. I know it's in front of me. I know it's happening. Pharaoh City became that for me. This was never supposed to be what it is. But I don't force it. People come in, people go out, and it keeps evolving. There's so many things that you said that are at the heart and mission statement of what we are. But 5 years from now, I don't know what we'll be. I know what we will is help. We will be there and we will support people and we will move things on. This is great. Billy, I have to share something with you that I was going to wait till off the air to tell you, but it's kind of appropriate the way you've been describing your creative, your writing, your production. We talked very briefly in a text. I was at a Zach Williams concert at the Beacon, and a friend of mine does front of house there. He was there and we were talking, and I just love Zach Williams' music. It's I don't know what it is. It's Christian, it's blues, it's rock. It's just awesome. And he's got his own backstory that's pretty cool. But here's the part that I loved. So I'm there, and obviously his audience is very Christian based, very spiritual, the most diverse group of people I've ever seen in one place. At times I felt like I was in a gospel church. It was like a revival meeting that I've never been to, but it had that energy. I'm getting it now. That had that energy. It was so cool. So this is going on and on. My wife had no idea what to even expect. She did this for me. She knows I was Zach Williams. She was obviously, you can't help but be moved. But here's the part. Zach Williams, 10-piece band on stage. Zach Williams is center. Everybody else is doing, he's got horn sections. He's got backup singers, blah, 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 blah. Show comes to a conclusion. The entire band walks in front of him during the song. They walk in front of him and continue to play. He's behind them. I have worked for my 25 years of being around artists. Nobody has let their band upstage them like he did. I was like, that is so effing cool. This is heart. Yeah. This guy believes every word that came out of his songs. To do that. And then they do an encore, they come back, and he ended the show like you would a Broadway play. He brought them all out. They all did their bow, but he never took that star position. Mm-hmm. And that was my walk away from that. I just said, I am so glad. It took me a long time to see an artist do that. But what a great, great moment to be able to let your band upstage you. I mean, people who aren't musicians don't really understand how powerful that is, because I don't know if I ever could.
Yeah, especially if it's your name.
Yes.
That people are coming to see. But there's such a great lesson in that, and I think it's so easy to let ego drive the car especially when you're an artist and you're putting yourself in front of other people. And I always say, ego, you gotta have it in the car,
right?
But you can't let it drive. Ego's got to navigate, and so. And the other version of that, and this is what you were just describing, is that idea of, I'm the one with my antenna up. This information is hitting the antenna. It's flowing through me, but it's all of us. Yeah. And I feel like symbolically, that's what Zach was doing there. He was saying, I am the antenna here, but it's flowing through these musicians and into you.
Right.
And it's not really me and you. It's us.
Yep. Absolutely. And I wanted to say this before. I'm already running out of time in my own head. But you mentioned something, and I just want to say, for people who don't have the opportunity to be on stages and to be playing to an audience, whether it's 400 or 86,000 in a stadium, there is a feedback loop that happens. Oh, yeah. The audience to the artist, the artist to the audience, the audience to the artist, and it keeps getting bigger and it keeps building. Now, people who go to a show know that because they feel it here, but they don't know that that's actually happening on the stage.
Right. Yeah.
Because they've not been there. Those of us who have been blessed to be able to be on both sides, know it. And that feeling is so cool because the audience, you're part of, let's say 20,000. The band is part of 5. So when 20,000 are feeding to the stage, it's very different than when the 5 are feeding to 20. When you're on that stage, it's a wall of energy coming at you. It's so cool.
Yeah. And it's, you know, and if you've had the experience of having that happen, then it makes you appreciate it, I think, even more, because sometimes the inverse, where like that doesn't happen, and then you realize, oh, like I'm not opening myself up, or there's something, because I've had the feedback loop, which can be addictive.
Yep.
But then I've also had the experience of like the wall there and being like something about me, maybe something about them, but maybe something about me is keeping that from happening. And then that becomes something to learn from, but you can't really appreciate that unless you've had the feedback loop experience as well. Yeah.
Great. Okay. As always, you and I can talk for hours about everything. But unfortunately, I can't do that on here. So,
right.
Billy, thank you so much. This was exactly what I expected it to be. This is awesome. So many great points you made, and it's going to be so helpful for so many people. So, appreciate it, brother. We'll get together soon.
Thanks for having me. Talk to you soon.